Hey guys, welcome back. So, again, as always, huge thank you to everyone who's subscribed, shared, and liked so far. Really can't do this without you. Really glad you are enjoying the content, and just, yeah, no other words, just having a thank you for giving me a chance. So, today's case is another one that I recently come across. It's quite a shocker, if I'm honest. I was quite shocked reading what actually happened during these assaults. Um, so the case I'm going to be talking to you about today is Keven Lee Graff. So I'm kind of hoping that some of you guys may have not heard of this one. If you have heard of it, just obviously feel free to comment down below. But if you haven't, then please sit back and enjoy. So, as always, I like to start from the beginning. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about Kevin's backstory. I just do want to point out also, um, obviously, I'm in the UK. A lot of the information that I could find, obviously, I've scripted down, but being in the UK and I don't have access to the software to access websites from abroad. So a lot of the information that I was trying to find, I couldn't get access to the websites. So obviously, if you do know this case and you know any details that I missed out, then please just obviously comment down below. But anyway, so let's get into the story of Keven Lee Graff. So, Keven Lee Graff, he was born in 1977, and he was actually born in Oregon, which a little bit of a mouthful, not gonna lie. So he grew up in a single parent family, from what I could gather. So at this point, so his mum and dad had split up, and his mum had actually left the family home. As far as I'm aware, whether or not she was still involved in Kevin's life in some aspects, but she's found it easier to not be in the family home and raising her children full time. And obviously, that's absolutely fine if it works out better for the father to be doing that job. Then so be it. So he stayed with his father Steve, and as obviously I stated, Steve and Kevin's mother had separated when he was only a toddler. A neighbour, so Dan Huxell, he said that Keven was actually one of the best kids that was growing up in the area at the time. He said that he was clean cut and he stayed out of trouble quite a lot. But in his teen years, and it's obviously a problem for many teenagers when they're coming to terms with themselves, they become a little bit of a problem. I certainly did, and I'm sure a lot of you watching can probably attest that you probably did as well. So Kevin's family noticed a massive change in his behaviour, and they really become concerned for his well-being and his mental health. So he started showing like really erratic and impulsive behaviour, and he would often lash out at people for no apparent reason. So after finishing high school, Keven then actually joined the Marines in around 1995 or 96. Um, and he was stationed at Camp Pendleton in San Diego. And by all accounts, like, he really loved his time in the Marines, but sadly it was cut short due to a ankle injury. So he was released on medical discharge, and after this, his mental health took a really deep decline. And his family then moved him into the Department of Veteran Affairs in Long Beach. So this is a federal agency which provides healthcare services to eligible military veterans. So obviously it's really good at this particular point that obviously his mental health issues were taken into account. Because obviously if you think about the time frame this happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, mental health wasn't as widely discussed back then as it is now, and I can certainly attest for that. So, my older brother, just a little side note, he is someone who suffers quite a lot with his mental health. He growing up, he had a lot of learning difficulties, and it resulted in him being expelled from numerous schools, and we ended up having to move around quite a lot. As young as myself and my sister went to multiple other schools because a lot of the schools weren't willing to accommodate my brother. They just put him down as a problem child. Whereas obviously nowadays, and rightly so, mental health is a lot more widely known about, widely more talked about, and there's a lot more services and funding available, rightly so. It's just amazing how 20 or 30 years can make a difference. So, like I said, obviously he was placed into this facility, a medical centre for veterans, but he actually only lasted there for 10 days before he was discharged himself. His only diagnosis at this time was manic depression, and later on down the line, Kevin actually went on to have a complete nervous breakdown. And this was confirmed by Kevin's half brother Jacob. And Jacob added that the family tried to get Kevin institutionalised at this point, but they got told there was nothing to be done unless he was a threat to himself or others. And as you find out later on, obviously, being this sort of material, it proves that he really was a threat to others. So Jacob added that he felt that the Marines had completely changed Kevin, and that he was never the same person afterwards, and which is quite a common thing, especially if you're dealing with like PTSD, trauma, so on and so forth. So Kevin at this point, he became a drifter and he started traveling throughout South California, which again, a really common thing with the armed forces. So in the UK, I'm not really sure about other countries abroad, but in the UK, we do actually have quite a bad problem and really, really poor services when it comes to the armed forces. So when these men and women are coming back from whatever country they've come from, or from fighting for the Queen, or the King, sorry now, the funding and availability isn't there for them, and a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, they find themselves being homeless, sleeping rough and sofa surfing and whatnot because there's just no available help for them. It's just like a really sad indictment of what this country is about, really, in my opinion. So, like I said, obviously Kevin starts traveling throughout South California, and then somehow he finds himself in Vegas, and he is arrested on suspicion of lewd behaviour, which is something I don't really get. Like, he either did it or he didn't. Like, why is there a suspicion there? But if anyone wants to highlight it, then please feel free, comment down below. So this was after he exposed himself to a woman, and he later pled guilty to disorderly conduct. So after this, then Kevin then returns to San Diego, and his looks actually get him noticed by the gay community. So obviously you can see in the thumbnail, probably not the best picture of Keven, but it's the only one that I could find. Um, but by all accounts, he was a very handsome man back in the day, and these looks, they get him noticed by the gay community in San Diego. So he then goes up to Hillcrest, still getting the same sort of attention, and he makes connections within the gay community. And they see Keven is really, really struggling, and they basically just suggest to him that he can make money as a go-go dancer. And Keven auditions, and he ends up becoming a really popular fixture at bars and nightclubs. And it's while he was doing his career as a dancer that he ends up being embroiled in escorting. So he becomes widely known as someone who is gay for pay, which is basically a man who identifies as straight, but he thinks it's easier money for him if he has sex with men on the side, and that way he's not really, accepting his bisexual urges, so to speak, which I don't agree with. But if that's how they want to do, live their life, then I'm not going to judge them. But I just don't really agree with that sort of thing. I like to live my life quite black and white, and obviously I know this was like 20 odd years ago. Obviously times were a little bit different, but nowadays obviously a lot of the times when you go on apps and whatnot, there's still a lot of men out there, men and women, sorry, that are struggling to come to terms with themselves, or they know themselves but they don't want to come out for fear of prosecution. But yeah, I don't really agree with the whole idea of gay for pay. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. So Keven then soon picks up a really debilitating drug habit, and he uses the escorting to fund this habit. He then, as it obviously develops, he becomes a really, really popular fixture on the gay scene as the go-go dancer. And he's even featured on the 2002 cover of the defunct Gay and Lesbian Times, which I did try and find, but I couldn't find. Like I said, obviously the image in the thumbnail is the only picture that I could actually find of Keven. In 2003, he performs a zoo party, which is hosted by the San Diego Zoo. So obviously they probably had an opening for a new exhibit, and all these dancers, including Keven, obviously all go in, perform dressed as animals, what some people probably refer to as furries, but personally I think that's something a little bit different. So soon after this little performance at the San Diego Zoo, Keven, he returns to drifting, sadly, and he starts moving up the Huntington coast to Los Angeles, and he ends up setting in Third and La Brea. He's hooking up with people in order to couch surf. But at some point, sadly, he does start sleeping rough. So this carried on well into 2004. And then we come to the day in question of Keven's biggest crimes. Really, really awful. So obviously what I'm going to be talking about at this point, it does get quite graphic. So just to obviously put that out there. I know obviously we all come for this sort of information with true crime, but this is probably one of the most graphic stories I've come across at this point. One of the most, not the most, one of the most. So Sunday, June the 13th, 2004, so Keven found himself outside the home of Robert Lee's. And this was on Courtney Avenue in Hollywood. So this particular area of Hollywood, it wasn't really known for having a really high crime rate. In fact, the actual biggest scandal that happened in that area was when Hugh Grant was arrested with Divine Brown, and that was back in 1995. So Hugh was either driving or he was parked up in his car with Divine. She was performing oral sex on him, and the police come over, book him in, and obviously it caused a massive hoo-ha. It didn't really affect obviously Hugh's career in the long run. He still went on to make some really good films, and I think Divine actually did quite well out of it herself, from what I believe. So Robert, he lived in a small white bungalow on the corner of Courtney Avenue. So police, they really struggled to piece together how Keven had found himself at this particular address. And many locals believe that because of his past as being an escort, this crime was him being booked as an escort, and then he had gone back to enact some sort of deranged revenge. However, what happens at this address, in my eyes, goes beyond that. So just a little, obviously I like to do a little backstory on the victims as well, because these videos are about giving those victims the voice that was taken away from them. So Robert Lees was born in San Diego on July the 10th, 1912. So he was actually only a month away from his 92nd birthday. So he moved to Hollywood in the 1930s, and this was with aspirations to be an actor. But so he got quite a few films in the 30s, from what I could find, but these were all uncredited roles. So he then obviously decided to turn his talents to writing. And his writing career really did take off for him. And he done pretty well. He wrote some really amazing stuff. But then he finds himself in a bit of bother in the 1950s. So, in 1951, Robert was named as a member of the Communist Party of America. And he was been a member of that party since 1939. And Robert was called to testify in 1952, and he ended up pleading the fifth, which basically means that he just refused to give over any names. So, obviously, this whole point in history is known as the McCarthy era, and this was basically the repression and prosecution of left-wing supporters, and it spread a massive fear campaign of alleged communist and Soviet influence on America. And so it spanned from the 1940s into the 50s. It was named after the Senator Joseph McCarthy. But in the mid-1950s, his popularity took a nosedive after many of his accusations were found out to be lies. Shock horror, someone in power actually lying. Doesn't surprise me whatsoever. Probably doesn't surprise you guys either. So this whole thing, it effectively ended Robert's career at this point, and he was completely blacklisted throughout America. However, Robert then worked his way around this, and he started writing under the pseudonym J.E. Selby, or sometimes he was credited as J. Selby, and he started writing for acts such as Abbott and Costello. Um, Alfred Hitchcock wrote a few parts of Alfred Hitchcock's films. But I think his biggest success was the Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis film Jumpin' Jacks. And he carried on writing up until the 1980s, and then retired in 1983 after his wife Jean passed away from cancer. And then, not long after his wife had passed away, so the same year, he begins seeing another woman by the name of Helen, and they stay together up until the point of what we're going to get into now. So on June 13th, 2004, Robert, after obviously everything that we just spoke about, he actually received a pardon, and he had finally been recognised for his work. Um, he was actually at home on this particular day. He was getting ready to attend a ceremony, and this was like a lifetime achievement award that was being held in his name. So around 11 a.m., Keven he walks onto the property, takes a little look around, and basically tries out a door and walks straight in. So obviously, as I pointed out, this area wasn't known for having a high crime rate. So people at this point, they probably felt it was really safe for them to leave their doors unlocked. So he starts sort of just rooting around the bedroom, probably just trying to find a bit of money, whatnot. And this ends up startling Robert, and naturally he requests that Keven leaves the property. However, Keven sadly attacks Robert, and he bludgeons him repeatedly with a knife. And he then repeatedly stabs Robert to death. Um, so obviously, a 92-year-old man, he's not going to have any chance of fighting back against someone who, well, Keven was now 27 at this point. But obviously, after killing the Frauon man, like Keven was not done there. So he then sets about on removing Robert's head, and he actually successfully does this. And he wasn't sure, they never specified what weapon he used for this, because obviously it takes a lot of skill and a lot of effort to actually cut through layers of skin, muscle, bone, and completely detach the head from the body. But he actually managed to do this. He then cuts out one of Robert's eyes, and again with another unspecified tool, I'm assuming a spoon, but I could be wrong. He then begins scooping out the brain matter through Robert's empty eye socket. Keven then removes his belt, and he threads the end of the belt through the socket and feeds it through down the neck stump. He then fastens the belt to make some sort of crude handle. He then collects a load of towels and he just lays them on top of Robert's body, and he leaves the house through the back door. So he just basically casually walking through the neighbourhood, still carrying the severed head. I can't, and bearing in mind, obviously, this is midday at this point, probably just gone midday. People are going to be walking around. God knows what they must be feeling. They probably thought, oh, this is probably a film prop or something. Because bearing in mind, this particular area is only a 20-minute drive from Paramount Studios in Hollywood. So Kevin then, obviously, like I said, he leaves the property, he jumps over the back fence, and all this time still carrying Robert's head. And he finds himself on the property of retired doctor Morley Engelson, who was 69 at this point. So Morley, he was born on the 2nd of May 1935 in Santa Monica, and he graduated Fairfax High School and went on to study at the University of Southern California. And he worked as a physician for 35 years, so he'd only recently retired at this point. So he was said to have been married to his soulmate Valerie, and between them they had 3 children. So obviously all the information I found on Morley, I actually found his obituary and read it. So it turns out Valerie was his second wife. I couldn't find any information on his first wife. But like I said, obviously between them they had 3 children, so sons John and Danny, and a daughter Dina, and they had 2 grandsons, Eli and Josh. And they all said that Morley was absolutely dedicated to his little Shih Tzu dog Stanley, who he referred to as Baby Boy. So Morley, he was actually home alone this particular day, and he was in the process of booking a plane ticket to a business trip in San Jose. And he was actually booking this over the phone. This is when Kevin, again, just the sliding doors moment, if you want to call it that, he walks through the door. Again, just door completely unlocked, and again, like Robert did, Morley jumps up and demands Robert to vacate the property. Kevin, however, he sees red and he just basically grabs a knife off the kitchen counter, and he again repeatedly stabs Morley to death. He then, at some unspecified point, I believe, obviously Stanley was probably just trying to protect his owner, and Kevin ended up kicking the dog in the face, and this resulted in Stanley losing one of his eyes. After this, Kevin then removes Morley's trousers, and he mutilates and severs and removes Morley's penis. And he then picks up a fireplace poker and he passes it through Morley's neck. He then picks up the house keys and Morley's car keys. As he's leaving, he just basically casually places Robert's mutilated head on Morley's bed, and, like I said, leaves the house with the keys to the car, locks the door, and drives off in Morley's Mercedes. Unbeknownst to Kevin, obviously, like I said, Morley was in the process of booking a plane ticket, and the woman on the other end of the phone, the sales lady, she actually overheard the whole entire thing. And naturally, she's got on the phone to LAPD right away. They get to the house. I couldn't really find the time frame of how long it took them to get there, but they get there, they look through the window, they can see Morley's body just laying there, and they have to force their way into the house to investigate. This is when they come across, obviously, what has happened to Morley. They come across Stanley and obviously Robert's head in the bedroom. So obviously a massive manhunt goes on. So they're just trying to investigate what's happened at this point. You know, obviously they've got one man laying dead in his living room, an injured dog, and then another man's severed head in another part of the room, but no second body. They then receive a call about the discovery of Robert's body. So during the time of killing Morley, Robert's long-term girlfriend, as I was saying, Helen Colton. So at this point, they've been together for 21 years. So she arrived at the house to pick Robert up to take him to the award show. So obviously, at this particular point, like I said, they've been together for quite a long time at this point, but they had never moved in. In fact, Helen only lived 8 doors down from Robert at this point. So Helen quoted that she said it was unreal. I couldn't believe it. I was really befuddled for a moment, and it was like a movie, not real life. So the stolen Mercedes, it was then found outside the house where Keven was living. So this is only a few hours after the incident. And officers found a pair of Kevin's shoes actually disposed outside in the rubbish. Then it skips forward like to 2 days. So obviously at this point the police are still searching. And 2 days out on the 15th of June, Keven is then seen outside the gates of Paramount Studios. So like I said, it's only about a 20-minute drive from Morley and Robert's houses. Keven then approaches the guards and he asks for the number of a female employee. Obviously, naturally, they turn him away, and it's not known who Keven was asking for at this point. So obviously, like I said, they refuse, and Keven walks away, talking really loudly to himself, and he's giving the middle finger and just being like really obscene to people that are just driving by. Security guard Isaac Macias, he said that just basically that's obviously something didn't feel right to him. And the other guard, Craig Phillips, he said the way he was behaving, we kept the surveillance camera on him at all time. So meanwhile, while this was going on, police, they made a link of Keven to these murders. And Keven's image was then shown on a televised news conference that exact same day. And this was actually watched by Craig Phillips while he was on his break. So Craig's just sitting chilling, this comes on, and he just exclaimed, obviously, that's him. Which is something that obviously we all do if we recognise someone on TV. You know, we talk to the TV like it can hear us or something. So then Craig obviously contacts the police and they arrive within minutes. And as they leave, obviously from taking Craig's statement, as they're going down the road, they happen to spot Keven. Luckily, he's just chilling out, sitting on the wall just a few miles down the road. He is then arrested on Melrose Avenue and he's carrying, really weirdly, like a Bible and a can of mace. And during the questioning, Keven said that he was high on methamphetamines and ecstasy, and he actually had no memory of the murders. And he said that if I did this, I just want to say I'm sorry, which seems to be quite a common thing with some of the stories that I read and probably some of the stories that you guys have come across when they try and make out that they have no recollection of what they've actually done, which I find it hard to believe, if I'm honest. So he goes on to say that saying sorry isn't enough, and it isn't going to do anything, but he's no criminal, and he just adds that he's a really good kid. And it's like, mate, you're 27 at this point, you're not a kid. So, bizarrely, this case actually took almost 4 years to get to court, and this is a lot of the stuff that was talked about in court. I wasn't able to find So like I said, obviously because of my VPN and all everything, my IP address, a lot of the information was blocked to me. But obviously, if you guys can find any other information, feel free, and you can comment down below, or you can direct message me, whatever's easier. But I can only work with what I've got, and I do like to obviously delve into the court cases. So it begins on the February 26th of 2008, and Keven, he manages to escape the death penalty, and this is by a plea deal that he's made with the police. And he pleads guilty to the 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with 8 other charges, including torture, mayhem, and burglary. And this bit kind of annoyed me, I'm not gonna lie, because I really don't understand why mental health is always put in with cases like this, because having mental health doesn't make you go out and do these kind of things, so you're more of a chance of being a danger to yourself. So, and it's something that I really feel passionate about, because obviously, like I said, with my brother, but there's other members of my family that suffer from mental health. It's something that I like to talk about. I like to advocate, because I have a strong passion for that kind of subject. So when it's brought up as a sort of defence or a mitigation, it really does boils my piss, if I'm really, really frank with you. So Kevin's attorney, he said that Keven suffered from a severe mental illness consistent with bipolar disorder, which is nothing but an insult to people who do suffer from bipolar disorder. But I digress. And coupled this with psychotic features of schizoaffective disorder. In April 2008, Keven was sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. And obviously, like I said, this was all under a plea bargain. And in addition to his sentence, Keven was ordered to pay $9,900 in restitution and court fees, and a further $700 in funeral costs to the families. However, obviously this $700, by all accounts, this was donated. So the trial was watched by both Robert and Morley's families, and Keven actually had the audacity to speak to them directly. And he said, "I don't remember, I don't understand, I don't think I have a mental illness, but apparently I do. Because who in their right mind would do this? This person gave me drugs." Obviously, he doesn't name anyone's names, he just says this person. And I took these and I didn't know what they were. And then all this happened. It's just senseless acts for no reason. It makes no sense. I'm not a violent person. I do yoga and I study religion. Not that it should be really a factor, because in my personal opinion, again, if you feel I'm wrong, please feel free to comment. You're entitled to your opinion as much as I'm entitled to mine. But my personal belief is that some of the worst crimes in history, some of the worst atrocities in history, have been done in the name of religion. So I don't really understand why that really needs to be a factor in this point. So he goes on to say that he studies religion and he tries to focus on positive things, and he tries to be the best person that he can be. He adds that, "I can say I'm sorry, but sorry doesn't cut it." He then finishes, and his father, Stephen, he jumps up and says, shouts out, "Keven, I love you, we are all sorry." Keven replies that he loves him back, and then he's led down. So in the victim impact statements, Valerie, so Morley's second wife, She stated, "I cry thinking about your last vision, scared of staring into the eyes of a demented beast, a total stranger from the street. I know your killer will die in prison, one day alone in his cell, old at the end of his miserable life. And then he'll be carried off to hell." After this, Valerie was actually approached by Kevin's mother, and Kevin's mother tried to hug Valerie, and she basically tried to say apologise, and Valerie pushed her away and just looked her dead in the eye and said to her, why did he do this? But certainly that obviously Kevin's mother, she didn't have the answers to this. So Helen Colton, she said that being hugged by Robert always made me feel safe, but Robert wasn't strong enough to fend off your blows. Which we can kind of see, poor Robert, he was, like I said, 92 at this particular point in his life. He had no chance. So Robert's son, who was 63 at the time, and he was also called Robert, he said that he was satisfied with the guilty plea, but he still misses his father. And Robert added, he was a very dear old man who suffered enough in his life and never got over such huge issues. He said that he feared if he ever saw Keven again, he would kill him on sight. He added, there's no closure for something like this. It's a fleeting experience, but the loss is forever and you don't get over it. So, like I said, obviously Keven is ordered to serve the rest of his life in prison. I couldn't find what prison that he was sent to. All I do know is that he was actually moved to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California, and that was in January 2014. Other than that, I wasn't able to find any other information about his time that he has served already. So that brings us to the end of the story of what I could find on this case. I do apologise, obviously, that I didn't get around to doing the video yesterday. Had a bit of an issue as I was editing. My software completely crashed and I actually lost my data of what I filmed. So having to refilm this fairly late at night. But again, just a massive thank you. Please like, share and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. If you've got anything that you want to add to this story, please let me know. Just again, massive thank you, and I will see you guys soon for the next one. Please stay safe.